Uh, so just for my introduction, I'm a senior analyst of business development and licensing at Mount Sinai Innovation Partners. I have a background in bioengineering, and I've done PhD in bioengineering. That then I dabbled in the entrepreneurship, just like many of you. That led to a company in the medical device space. I was trying to lead commercialization of that technology for a while, and then that led to a role in as an intern in a VC firm that was pre-seed seed stage, and then that got me interested in the world of technology commercialization per se, having to look or interested in looking at various different novel solutions, and that led me to this role here at Mount Sinai. Been in this role or this area, business development, about 5 years, and quite excited to see new innovations coming through the system like Mount Sinai. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, wait, I'm driving them. So in the first half of this module, I'll go over some of the introduction of some of the key concepts in technology commercialization. And later half, we'll go through an exercise together of evaluating one such invention or the technology. So to start with, I wanted to introduce Mount Sinai Innovation Partners to everyone in case you aren't really familiar with what we do. So MSIP serves as an interface between Mount Sinai Health System and the commercial entities for the research partnerships and technology licensing and commercialization broadly. MSIP serves as a partners. We partner with Mount Sinai PIs and innovators at Mount Sinai and work with them, to create value for Mount Sinai system altogether, and they benefit patients as well. And we do that through several different avenues, which are listed here at bottom. It all starts with scouting for the technology, evaluating it for its potential commercialization, and then it's followed by a stream of activities which all eventually lead to commercialization. So also to learn about life cycle of this commercialization, it starts with research. So research is extremely important because that leads to the ideation of a new sort of, you identify either a problem during a research or a solution to that problem, and that leads to an idea of, hey, how can I solve a bigger problem out there in healthcare or life sciences in general or beyond. So then the next phase is assessment. So we assess the potential for commercialization, appropriate strategies for protection of the intellectual property, then outreach to the appropriate partners, channels that we could commercialize it with, and then negotiations. And this is important piece for us to understand. Mount Sinai Health System, being a non-profit organization, cannot engage and do the commercialization activity themselves. So we partner a lot with industry and other investors and partners to bring this technology to the market. And in fact, that helps accelerate the commercialization as well. So then there are agreements that are put in place, and these are important documents which are essential for the smooth and legal operation of businesses. And then there are alliances that are formed, and then eventually the revenue is generated, which in turn may fund research. So this is kind of a life cycle of commercialization at MSIP. Now, I wanted to also touch upon what is the process here at MSIP and give you an example of the activities that we have done in past. So this is an example from 2020. And as you might realize, like this, despite of the tough times that we were all in, the COVID, we received about 152 inventions that year. Then, we did assessment and triaging process, which is, what we do here at MSIP a lot. And then about 378 patents filed. And, number of patents depend on the stages of prosecution. So some of these could be from previous years also. And then within marketing campaigns and portfolio management activities a lot. That led to about 93 new licenses and options. It generated about $77 million of gross licensing proceeds and about $21 million of industry research funding. So this is kind of a typical, you know, snapshot of a year at MSIP, and a lot of activities with complex, a lot of complexity as well. And I think fellowship program kind of, aims at giving you the overview of some of these activities that we do. So some of the examples of what we've done in past or commercialized, and this kind of shows to the fact that we've commercialized uh, technologies that are very diverse. So there's that know-how and experience and expertise here at MSIP. Uh, we have, uh, as you can see here in this table, we have commercialized therapeutic prophylactics, diagnostic, medical device, and research tools as well. Just to kind of go over the examples, Fabrazyme is a enzyme replacement therapy for Fabry's disease, and this is now available in over 330 countries. And this is the first treatment ever for Fabry's disease, so it was quite groundbreaking. Then FluMist is an intranasal flu vaccine that also came from Mount Sinai. It protects against multiple strains of flu, and you don't need to, it's needle free, it's nasal spray, so it's very accessible in those terms. Uh, from in terms of diagnostic, recombinant human tissue factor, this has been commercialized by Siemens, Roche, and Alere. Then we also have a medical device like mitral valve repair ring, which has been commercialized by Edwards. And then the last but not the least, research reagents. And there's a lot of deals that we do each year in this area. These are cell lines, mouse models that you generate during the research that are quite unique, and other researchers and laboratories across the academia and industry both can use. And one such example is LX2 human hepatic cell line. And this has been commercialized by EMD Millipore and 30 other companies. So we were able to, establish partnership with multiple companies to take this to market. Now, and if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in chat and I'll address them later at the end of the talk. So another aspect that I wanted to touch upon was IP ownership. And essentially, this is just an excerpt from the IP policy. I just wanted to bring it up to this group and familiarize you all with this. So Mount Sinai Health System owns all the invention conceived or reduced to practice or otherwise by Mount Sinai Health System members. And this is kind of across the industry, pretty much standard. And then there are certain criteria for this, like it has to be in the course and scope of their employment here at Mount Sinai Health System. It could be more than incidental use of the resources or the facilities that are from the system, or funds that were used from the system, or and this is last one is quite interesting and important too. Under a consulting agreement that does not conform to health systems policies relating to the consulting. And so any invention that was generated during or conceived during the consulting agreement that does not conform with Sinai's policies, that invention is also owned by system. And this is important to remember if you're consulting. So if you develop IP as a student, trainee, postdoc, fellow, faculty member, or any employee for that matter of Sinai, under supervision of Sinai, and that the IP is owned by the system. And these are just the policies that points from the policies that are taken here. And there's a definition in the US law for an inventor. And these resources are available on the USPTO website. But inventor in US law is a person who makes original and significant intellectual contribution leading to the conception of invention. This concept is significantly different than the authorship of an academic paper or publication. So it's quite important as you're inventing and innovating uh, to understand these definitions. Now, kind of important aspect because at the end of the life cycle, many of the inventions may not get to this stage. But I mean, our goal is to get as many as to the finish line and generate revenues, and these are determined by several external factors too in the market. So, but typical policy of the of Mount Sinai is that 50% goes to inventors up to $1 million, and then rest of the 50% of the revenue, 45% goes to Mount Sinai Health System, and 5% goes to Inventors Research Fund. Before these distributions are done, any cost associated with patenting or otherwise, they're taken out, but and then rest of it is distributed. Now, after $1 million of revenue, the inventor's share reduces to 33%. And this is quite generous as compared to all the other, we've done this analysis, and this is quite generous compared to all the other universities in the area. So uh, I see that there's a question in the chat. I'll be addressing this later. Thank you. Now, what is intellectual property? It is essentially a property, an asset, intellectual asset, such as idea, invention, or a process that can be derived from the work of mind or intellect. Uh, and then these can also include intangible assets. Now, these words might not make a lot of sense, but as we are going to go through next few slides, they'll start to, become very apparent. Uh, Legally, IP is protected in 4 different ways: patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. Each form of legal protection is governed by its own body. So there are different regulatory, bodies that govern these processes. And why do we care about intellectual property protection? Because it provides financial incentives uh, through commercialization, and it also provides legal right to exclude others from entering into the same space commercially. And then also it allows us to recoup investment because there's a protection around it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are several types of intellectual properties. So it helps us to understand what they are and what are some of the examples. I'll start from the top. It's one such and a very important actually type of intellectual property is know-how. And very often, many of us don't realize how important this is. This may not be protectable. So this is not something that you could protect, but these are more like the knowledge that you've gained over several years of doing research. And it's something that may be published or may not be published. It could be protocols, it could be certain specialized way of doing things. Uh, and all that information helps somebody create a commercializable product, and that information has value, and that is captured through know-how. It's not protected, it's generally a secret information. uh, well, it's confidential information, I mean. And like I mentioned, it's expertise and protocols. Then comes tangible materials. These are work product of the research, and great examples are mouse models, cell lines, antibodies, hybridomas, etc. Then there are trade secrets, which are uh, confidential. You know, the protection that we can use is confidentiality, and the examples are ingredients, methods that you use. And then there's distinction between know-how and trade secret. Trade secret is a way of protecting the intellectual property, and it's usually a company that keeps those secrets that are relevant for their business. Trademarks is another way we can protect a brand, and usually you could protect logos, symbols, name. For example, Mount Sinai is a brand, and there's a certain reputation value to the brand, uh, and that can be protected through trademark. Then there's copyrights. Uh, Protection is usually written work. So the moment you write something down and publish it, it becomes like you are an author and it's asserted. But you can also get a formal copyrights filed. It lasts, I think there are regulation. I think copyright lasts until I think 30 years after and don't quote me on this. I think we all have to double check this, but this is the longest protection that I've known. And last is patent. Patent is tricky because not everything that we think is patentable is patentable. So there needs to be done an analysis. And the language, and I'm going to use layman's terms, but the language that is used by a lot of the patent attorneys is very specific and is in accordance to the US patent law, and it may not translate to our general understanding. So it's very important to understand those concepts and then see if our invention is really relevant and can be patented. And then there are strategies around patenting. It's quite an involved process. But here you can patent ideas that are backed by some convincing data. Now, I'll go over patenting process as well. What is patentable? Let me just, oops. Yeah, what is patentable? Usually different kind of patents are used to protect different kinds of invention. And then there are typically three types of inventions. One is design. Design patent is usually used a lot in medical device space, where you have a device that, looks certain way, has certain components and certain specifications. And that's when you could use design patent. Then there's plant patent, and this is specific, where you could do new plant species. We, in our business, we don't come across this a lot. In fact, almost none, because we are in healthcare business and there are very few such patents that emerge. Then there's utility patent. This is very common patent that we file, and this describes how a product is composed and how it functions. And the criteria for this is very important. It needs to be useful, it needs to be novel, and it needs to be non-obvious. And non-obviousness is it's kind of the killer in many cases. So it's very hard to convince a patent office that something is non-obvious. But there are strategies, there are ways. And then important components of this kind of patent is composition of matter. So new compounds, new sequences that are modified, uh, and then processes of like how would you use these new compounds, to treat XYZ disease in this dosage format, etc., etc. Then there are machines, which are devices. You could describe like this is how this machine would function, interact with other components, etc. And then last one is article of manufacture. So like something that you want to use in manufacturing of something else. Patenting process is a long and tedious process and very expensive as well. The expenses kind of escalate in the later stages. So from the disclosure to at 12-month mark, there's PCT filing. So there's a Paris Convention Treaty that allows you to go in with one single application, allows you to go internationally, but it is an expensive application. So from 12-month mark, this is when we would want to evaluate. I mean, we evaluate at the beginning before filing, and then we reevaluate at 12 months mark to see what has been the progress of commercialization, what has been the feedback, and from the patent office also what is the likely outcome. And based on all of these aspects, we determine whether we want to file BCT or not. But if we do, then at 16-month period, there will be a search report that gives us an idea of how what kind of objection or what might we face. And then at 18 months, it becomes public. So now you can imagine from 0 month to 18 month, nobody knows that we have filed patent. And that's true vice versa. Like we wouldn't know if somebody else has filed patent. So there are many such nuances in this process that you could learn if you go through this. Um, then there's also demand of international preliminary examination, and then this patentability report. Then there's a national phase conversion at 30 months typically, and then from there you can select individual countries. But this mark onwards, it is expenses of filing patents uh, you know kind of escalate a lot. So it is important for us to run our process parallelly. We disclose, we evaluate, we patent, we market it heavily, and see if any partner is willing to, uh, you know, enter into licensing agreement or some other partnership of sorts to develop this. Uh, so that this last phase is where we already have a partner on, and they can help us make these decisions and pay for the patent cost too. Ideally, I mean, that's the ideal course. Where can you search patent, and why would you search patent as an innovator? As an innovator, you want to innovate technologies or invent technologies that are novel, non-obvious, and useful. So it helps to kind of early on take a look at patent literature in addition to your usual, publications, reports, etc. And this is another resource that most of the patent attorneys use to identify the landscape. And we also use it to evaluate the landscape very often. There are many other paid resources, but these are the government resources that you could use. Now, oh, I forgot. So we also have these quizzes, and I would love if people can participate and provide some insight here. So I just wanted to check if you could answer this. Who and what determines who should be listed as an inventor in a patent application, regardless of whether they are Mount Sinai employee? Can anybody answer this question? Or feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to give 1 minute for everybody to enter.
Feel free to unmute yourself as well if you want
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah, feel free to, chime in, like unmute and mention it
I
as
see a
well.
lot of answers in the chat.
All right, so yeah, I see a lot of D's and E's. And I think, there's about 50-50 mix, but the correct answer is D, US patent law. So there is a clear definition of who the inventor is in the patent law, and it's determined by patent law. But thanks. This is great that many of you got it. And I know E is kind of confusing, but authorship does not determine the inventorship, and neither MSIP. It is a clear definition by US patent law. All right, another one. What percentage of patents earn earn enough dollar amount to cover their filing and prosecution expenses? This is, you can take a guess here. This goes to show like how risky or lucrative the business is that we operate in, and how hard it is to commercialize. But that doesn't deter us, because the outcomes that we saw earlier is quite interesting, because there's this sense of achievement if you could create a treatment for Fabry's disease. It's first ever treatment, so that's a driving force here. So let's see actually what the answer is. I see a lot of D's, E's. I also saw an A. So let me go to the next slide. And as I expected as well, I think it's less than 1%. So very few patents generate revenue, but I mean, there is various levels of success that some of these patents attain. And but that 1% is able to sort of justify the activities that we do, and because we're solving some of the challenging problems in the healthcare space. Now, this is also another important yet interesting aspect of what we do, uh, or what we strategically kind of time it. So public disclosure is very important to understand. It means discussing your invention openly, and it can result in losing your right to patent that invention. So disclosing this information publicly without any protection is not a good idea if you are seeking a technology commercialization and some sort of IP protection to support that. So public disclosures include sharing your IP through journal publications, website publications, conferences, talks. More generally, it is when you make IP publicly or any information related to IP data publicly available and accessible to those who are, in your field, who kind of understand the space and are able to describe that invention. Uh, and this could be like few couple of lines, couple of sentences in the manuscript. Really, that all that it takes. If that is the crux of the invention, then it's out there. To avoid losing the right to patent your IP, what we recommend always to our partners in the health system is your first step is disclose an invention to contact MSIP. There's like a disclosure portal where you have to first time, if you're new to MSIP, you sign up. And once you sign up, you're able to upload like a form, provide the information. And it is important to provide that information so that we can take a good look to evaluate the patentability and commercialization. It's a thorough investigation, and it's usually leads to a good outcome in terms of a good decision of whether we should file or not. And we also provide feedback to the inventors so that they can pivot to a better place if they need to, or progress with patenting. Then MSIP assesses, I guess I just went over this point. Uh, so we would determine whether it has a strong commercialization potential. And if it does, MSIP manager, one of us, will help you file the disclosure form and begin the process of commercialization. And this is where we go in depth with you and kind of find out what is the solution, how, what are the steps that are involved in development of this solution, what might be the challenges, uh, what are some of the resources that would be required, what are key steps that one needs to do to get to market, who would pay for this solution, kind of almost map out if this makes sense in a bigger picture. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the website that for Mount Sinai Innovation Partner, ip.mountsinai.org. And it can lead to several of these tags at bottom. Disclose a technology is where you would click and disclose a technology. You would have to sign up for each of these. Second is request an agreement. So say you want to talk to somebody about certain confidential information, then you would require a confidentiality agreement before you do that, and that can be requested here. And then all the other agreements as well, like any industry partnership that involves intellectual property, uh, or talking about your research that may have potential for intellectual property. And then you could search the existing technologies that we have. This is mainly for external partners, but if you're curious, you could take a look here too. And then for contacting, the last cloud can be used. Oh, another question, brief knowledge check. When should I disclose my technology to MSIP? What do you think? Okay, I see its answers here. Many D's. I see a couple of B's and C's. All right, let's go to the next slide and check what it is. So a good timing would be when you have some preliminary data to show, because say we evaluate, we figure out, we go through the process of commercialize, like mapping out with you, and then we realize we want to file. Like now is a good time to file a patent application. We would require some data to back it, and it's always a good idea. But you could also reach out to MSIP. It doesn't hurt reaching out earlier if you wanted to get a quick sort of check. But we prefer for the process, for the entire process, disclosure must happen when there is some data to show, uh, and certainly before publication and public disclosures. Now, we are entering the second half of the talk today. Uh, I wanted to go over an example, and I realize we don't have a lot of time, so I might run through this. We use a decision support document. It's kind of like a kind of a guide that we use, and I'm gonna skip over certain slides. Um, the purpose of the DSD is what we call it, is to analyze the technical strengths and the challenges of this technology and determine market characteristics, and also scope out the intellectual property landscape. And this helps us assess the commercialization potential. Here's an example. I mean, it's usually a slide deck format, but this is one example where I put together like the questions that we generally ask. And these questions are basic, but we can go in depth and do more analysis here. So, what is the technology? Is it diagnostic, therapeutic? Can you clearly define the utility and the benefits of this technology, right? And then, is anybody else working on it? How do you compare to people who are out there and developing similar solutions? And this nuance is important for patent filing. If you couldn't really distinguish at a technical as well as sort of potential utility level, it's going to be difficult. So listing other academic groups, biotech, pharma companies, very important to have this information with you. Uh, is this drug used for any other purposes? So anything similar would also be useful. Has the technology been presented or published? As we mentioned earlier, this is important information, and it's not yes, no, but it's like knowing the dates help us identify the timelines and dates that can be crucial. How was this work funded? What are the commercialization potential partners, gaps, uh, who might pay for this, etc. And what are the immediate obstacles that are faced by inventor, and what are the next steps for the inventors and for MSIP? So we map these out pretty clearly. And then is there anything else there's usually more to the story, and it's very important to identify these nuances, and these help in commercialization. And then final decision is made to whether file a patent on it, or to wait for some time to generate some key data, or to say, hey, this is fine, this is maybe not the best solution to protect at the moment or commercialize. So there's more feedback to maybe pivot to some other, focus on something, a next big idea, essentially. So this is just a sample deck. Given the time, I would go over an example where we already have done this step. So I'm going to skip over these slides. And yeah, so let me go over this example here. This is a typical DST that we would do. And in this case, the technology was a mouse reporter model that was developed for screening drugs in the area of colorectal cancer. Uh, Colorectal cancer is a big problem, important to develop drugs in this area. So what the invention was a homeobox gene CDX2 plays a major role in development, uh, and it acts as a tumor suppressor in adult colon. The expression of this gene is reduced in a tumor as the tumor progresses. So this is kind of a key marker for tumor progression, and restoring the expression of this marker uh, could help combat the tumor. This can be used as a target. And what they did here was, it's a mouse model. So they used this mouse model to screen chemical compounds and see if there was a hit for anti-cancer drug or candidate. And that was the purpose of this mouse. And in terms of competitive landscape, there were other groups that were developing similar CDX2 lag-Z model. And the difference was, it was a different length of promoter. It did not recapitulate the endogenous expression of CDX2. In terms of disclosure, it was disclosed in a thesis defense. It was presented at 3 different conferences. So, and typically these, if you remember, this is a tangible property. So we do not typically patent these anyway, unless it's something that is patentable and is has a utility non-obvious and has a lot of value. How was it funded? It was NIH grant funded, and then potentially interested parties were Jackson Lab wanted this for research tool. Big Pharma may want it for drug development purposes. The recommendation after evaluation was to not file a patent application because these were known methods. These were disclosed in previous talks and thesis defense. So we treated it as an unlicensed category, which is tangible property. But this does not mean that even though we haven't filed patent on it, we were still able to commercialize this. And there were licenses that partnerships are done with other pharma companies. So I wanted to mention, well, I wanted to leave some time for questions, but if you have any specific questions about DSD, I can go over them as well. So one is that, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, feel free to ask me questions. I don't